My last video, which came out on Saturday, was different to every other video that I've produced, but you probably didn't notice the difference. The reason it was different was the software that I used to edit it. It was my first video with DaVinci Resolve, so I thought what I'd do is do a short video on my early impressions of using DaVinci Resolve, how it compares to iMovie, and does it plug any of the gaps that I felt that iMovie had. I hope you'll enjoy the video. Hi everyone, thanks for joining me. So this is all about DaVinci Resolve, and DaVinci Resolve is a video editing package. It's free, although there is a paid version as well which has extra functions, but the version I'm using is free. And the version that I'm using is the beta 17.1 version, which has been optimized for use on the M1 chip that I've got in my new computer. So I thought I'd give it a go and see how it compares to iMovie. So I did a video a couple of weeks ago entitled "Is iMovie Good Enough for YouTube Videos?" And if you haven't watched that, I'll just stick a link to that up there now. It might be useful to look at that one first because it makes an interesting comparison to this one. And if you're not an Apple user, even though iMovie is only on Apple machines, it does have a lot in common with other kind of entry-level video editing packages, like the entry-level Adobe Premiere Rush, I think it is. So it might be worth checking that out. And I will kind of refer back to that earlier video occasionally when I'm talking through DaVinci Resolve and how I found it. And when I wrapped up the video about iMovie, one of the things I said about DaVinci Resolve was that it looked a lot more complicated, and it certainly does. So what we're going to do, we're going to jump in onto the computer and have a look and see, is it hard to use, and does it fill any of the gaps in functionality that I felt iMovie had? I'll just say, normally, or a lot of my videos are landscape photography based. They're out in the field. So if you like that kind of thing, don't forget to check out some more of my work if you're new here. And if you like what you see, don't forget to hit subscribe. Anyway, let's get onto the computer and see what DaVinci Resolve is all about. So the first thing to say is that as with trying out anything new that looks a little bit different to what we're used to, it's always a good idea to just try and do the things that are familiar. So I didn't try to do anything too complicated in here that was massively different from what I would have already done in iMovie. That's for a bit later when I got used to the basics. And as I said, iMovie is very simple. DaVinci Resolve certainly looks a lot more complicated. Okay, so looking at the layout here, yeah, it looks rather complicated, but it's very similar in some ways. Up on the top left here, I've got all of the media that I've imported, and down on the bottom left, I've got all kind of effects. So I've got video transitions, audio transitions, titles, etc. I've got my timeline running across the bottom, and you can see I've got a preview window running up here. I've actually got another preview window that I can have here. So if I click on one of these here, I can separately preview a clip in the media pool and the main timeline. And then up on the top right here, what I've got is the inspector, which is where I can make all sorts of adjustments to the clips. And I can close the inspector down if I don't want it there. If I go to the end of this so that I can play around with it, it's actually fairly simple to use. So if I want to add a clip, I can take the clip and I can drag it down onto the timeline. very simple. Let me turn the sound off there because it's going to be annoying, but it's still pretty simple. I can play around with that clip in exactly the same way as I would have done in iMovie, so I can shorten it, or if I want to, I can put the playhead in the middle and split the clip, and then delete the bit that I don't want. The other thing that I can do is I can use this preview screen here, so like this, and I can go through and I can set an in point by pressing I, and then kind of play through and set an out point by pressing O, and then it will only bring in the part of the clip that I've selected. Again, pretty simple to use. There are other options here which I must admit I haven't quite got my head around yet, where I think you can bring in clips, just bring in the video and leave the audio behind, or just bring in the audio and leave the video behind. But I haven't actually worked that out just yet. I can also bring clips in onto, above the timeline like this. Same thing, so it produces a cutaway. If I want transitions in here, let's add a clip there, and then maybe stick a clip on there just to play around with. And then I can, if I want a transition, I can just pop a transition in, except that I need to just make that clip a little bit shorter like that. And then I can just pop a transition in, and there we go, we've got a kind of a fade effect. If I want to put text in, I can go into my titles, and I can just drag a bit of text over the top, move onto it, and then I can add it, edit whatever I want it to say. That one there. Pretty simple. So in many ways this works very much the same as iMovie. There are some additional complications. So for example, if I kind of drag a clip in and try to put it between two other clips, it doesn't always seem like it wants to do it in quite the right way. It will sometimes overwrite the clip that I'm trying to put it into. But I think the answer is it's down to things like keyboard shortcuts to add the clip in between other clips instead of replacing them, which I've done there. So that one I pressed Command Shift and it let me basically split the timeline and put the clip in where I wanted it. So slightly more complicated because it's got more flexibility, but actually still pretty easy to do the basics on. And adding sound, I can put in a sound channel just like that. What about areas where iMovie was kind of lacking? Does DaVinci Resolve plug those gaps? Well, let's talk about those specifics. The first problem that I was having with iMovie was to do with the project settings, specifically the frame rate, because iMovie sets the frame rate according to the very first clip that you add into the timeline. So if you want a 30 frames per second timeline, you've got to make sure you put a 30 frames per second clip into the timeline first. With iMovie, you can actually set the project settings so you can set the frame rate that you want. And what I've actually done, because almost all of my videos are done as a 30 frames per second timeline, is I've actually set the default now that whenever I open a new project, it automatically becomes a 30 frames per second 1080p timeline. The second issue that I had with iMovie was a limit to the number of video tracks that you could have. Basically, you could only have 2 video tracks. I don't know what the limit on the number of tracks on DaVinci Resolve is, but if I keep going, that's six video tracks, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I have no idea what the limit is, but probably more than I'm ever going to want to use, to be honest. One of the other things that I really wanted to try to fix with this was kind of problems with horizons. So let's take a look at this clip, for example. So this was a bit of B-roll that I shot on that video, and this one's okay because I actually managed to get the horizon level, but just occasionally, particularly when you're setting up in a hurry, or if the tripod is on ground that might be a fraction uneven, or for any other reason, you might end up with a wobbly horizon. And in iMovie, all I could do was rotate the clip at 90-degree increments, so I couldn't actually correct that. But in this, if I use the inspector, I can rotate this clip in whatever increments I want. So I can do it, you know, like this. So let's say that I had got an uneven horizon. I could correct it. Now, of course, that's going to leave some gaps around the edge. So what I'd need to do is zoom in to fill those gaps using the zoom control. But it now means if I've got a really nice bit of B-roll, but I made a mess of it on the horizon, which does happen in a hurry sometimes, I can correct it, which is great. So I'm really happy with that. One of the other issues that I had with iMovie, it wasn't really an issue, but it was something I didn't do because I didn't feel iMovie supported it very well, was color grading. There's not very much you can do in iMovie to change the way that colors appear on the screen or in the video. But in here, if I go into the color module, and I've got to say, I haven't even started to look at this, but I've got a massive amount of control over what I can do with colors if I want to start doing it. I think if I want to get into color grading now, it's going to be pretty easy to do. So one of my other issues was being able to position text where I wanted it. iMovie had a lot of options for different text styles, but you couldn't really position it on the screen in any way. But for example, in this, let's say I want to use this one, sample text. Let's put it in there. This is the clean and simple. So if I scroll that through, you can see what it does is it creates it's a bad example to put it on. Let's find a different place to put it. You can see it creates a little text box that comes up there. If I'd had a similar text effect in iMovie, it would only let me put it right there. But if I don't want it there, I can now move this. So what I can do is I can make it smaller. And I can change the position, so I can move it way over to the left. Made it too small, let's make it a bit bigger. And let's move it down to the bottom. Yeah, like that. And now I've got my text in the style I want, exactly where I want it. Another box ticked. The final issue that I had, which was a particular issue with videos like I'm doing now, where I'm recording myself talking to the camera and I'm doing a screen recording and I want to synchronize those later as a picture-in-picture effect, was to do with being able to lock clips together. So let's go in here, click there, and I'm just going to grab a bit of video and drop it. That's too short. Let's grab it. That's too long. That one will do. Let's just pop that in there for now. Okay, so now I've got a bit of video in here, and the problem I used to have was if I then started, let's say I wanted to take out the middle of this clip, but the sound was synchronized with this clip, then it was really tricky to make sure I had to select each track for each adjustment I was making. What I can now do is I can take that one and that one, and if I hold down the shift key and click that one, I've now got all of those clips selected, and if I right click I can link those clips together. So if I now go and split the clip there and there, you can see it's put the split in the same place on all of the clips without me having to do any extra work with it. Performance wise, it runs pretty well on here. There's occasionally when you're playing back the preview of the timeline, you might get a little bit of a stutter around some of the transition effects, but not too bad, and certainly nothing that makes it difficult to actually do the editing. And of course, once I render the video out, that stutter disappears. It's only when you're actually looking at the preview here and you've got maybe multiple tracks and transitions in there as well. Okay, I'm going to wrap up now. I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you have, please give it a like, share it on social media, leave me a comment, let me know what you think, and as always, oh, don't forget about subscribing if you've enjoyed this. As always, I really appreciate you taking the time to watch, so thank you very much. And until the next video, bye.